Zohran Mamdani's first months as mayor, the case for and against his agenda. Zohran Mamdani came into office with a clear political thesis. New York's core problem is affordability, and City Hall should intervene more aggressively on housing, childcare, transportation, and social services. That is a real shift in governing style from the Adams era. It is also why judging him requires two different lenses at once. The first is moral and political. Is he pushing the city toward a fairer model? The second is managerial. Can he make the numbers work, keep services functioning, and avoid creating new risks while trying to solve old ones? The strongest case for Mamdani. The biggest argument in Mamdani's favor is that he has correctly diagnosed the pressure point that defines life in New York: cost. Housing, childcare, and transportation are not peripheral issues in the city. They are the budget line items that determine whether middle and working class residents can remain in the 5 boroughs at all. His early agenda reflects that diagnosis. The city and state announced a first phase 2K childcare expansion, creating free childcare spots for 2-year-olds and expanding the path toward broader early childhood access. Reuters described it as an initial step toward his universal childcare promise, with 2,000 seats later this year and 12,000 next year, backed by substantial state funding. That matters because childcare policy is one of the rare urban interventions that is simultaneously social policy, labor market policy, and anti-poverty policy. Supporters of Mamdani can reasonably argue that even partial progress here is more meaningful than symbolic politics. A city that lowers childcare costs can increase workforce participation, reduce family stress, and improve long-term educational outcomes. In that sense, Mamdani's emphasis is not just ideological, it is economically rational. His housing actions also show a serious attempt to use City Hall's institutional levers, not just rhetoric. In March, his administration launched a program aimed at delivering affordable housing on city-owned land faster, including a pre-qualification pipeline for developers with attention to nonprofit and minority and women-owned firms. He also introduced homeowner tools to support accessory dwelling units through pre-approved plans and guidance, which is a practical way to add incremental housing supply without waiting only for large rezoning battles. From a pro-Mamdani perspective, that is one of his best early strengths. He is trying to combine redistributive politics with supply-side housing measures. Many progressive city leaders are comfortable with tenant protection but less effective on expanding supply. Mamdani appears to understand that affordability cannot be solved by rhetoric alone. If New York is going to remain livable, it needs both protections for existing residents and more units. The ADU push and Cityland strategy suggest he is at least trying to govern on both tracks. There is also a serious pro-Mamdani case on political representation and public engagement. His backers would say he is trying to reorient City Hall toward communities that often feel talked at rather than governed with. His administration has emphasized community-facing engagement, and his public style is deliberately more movement-oriented than technocratic. Even critics who dislike that style would have to concede that it creates a different kind of democratic energy around city government. On public safety, the record is more complicated than his critics often suggest. New York's official crime data for early 2026 showed historic lows in shootings, shooting victims, and murders for the first 2 months of the year, with major crime down 8% in February citywide and declines across every borough. That does not prove Mamdani caused those numbers, especially because policing trends often reflect continuity from prior administrations and the NYPD leadership. But it does undercut simplistic arguments that a progressive mayor automatically produces immediate deterioration. At minimum, the feared instant collapse in order has not materialized in the citywide statistics available so far. Supporters can make another valid point here. Mamdani has not entered office by abolishing conventional policing. Instead, he has tried to build a broader community safety architecture around violence prevention, mental health crises, and civilian response capacity. His Executive Order 15 established an Office of Community Safety intended to unify and strengthen programs dealing with gun violence and crisis response. In theory, that can be a sensible urban governance move. Cities often send armed police into situations better handled by specialized civilian teams. Finally, there is a political economy argument in his favor. Mamdani is trying to protect working-class New Yorkers from carrying the full burden of fiscal adjustment. His public case against balancing the books on the backs of working-class New Yorkers is not fringe sentiment in a city where high rents, childcare costs, and commuting expenses already consume enormous shares of household income. Siena polling in March found strong support among New York City voters for giving the city authority to raise income taxes on residents earning at least $1 million. That means one of the most controversial elements of his agenda is not necessarily out of step with public opinion. The strongest case against Mamdani. The hardest critique of Mamdani is not that his goals are unserious. It is that his governing model may be financially unstable. The city's fiscal picture is the central problem hanging over everything else. The comptroller's comments on the preliminary budget say the administration increased net spending estimates significantly across the planned years, while also increasing revenue projections, particularly city-funded revenues. That is not automatically wrong, but it means the mayor is governing with a high-risk assumption set. More spending pressure, more optimistic revenue expectations, and an insistence that the burden not fall on working-class residents. That can work only if the revenues materialize and the savings plans are real. This is where the criticism bites. Mamdani ordered agencies to appoint chief savings officers and identify savings targets. and his office later said agencies had submitted proposals totaling more than $1.7 billion. That is the pro-administration version. But critics have attacked the rollout for a lack of transparency and for not yet demonstrating enough concrete, verifiable savings relative to the city's broader structural gap. Even sympathetic observers can see the issue. If a mayor campaigns on expansive affordability measures while facing a multi-billion-dollar budget challenge, execution and disclosure have to be airtight. So far, the political messaging has been more confident than the fiscal proof. A second major criticism is that some of his signature campaign ideas remain more compelling as slogans than as operational programs. The clearest example is fare-free buses. It was one of the banner promises of his affordability agenda, but Reuters reported that it remains stalled because of funding and MTA governance realities. This is a recurring problem for mayors with large activist mandates. They can set city priorities, but many of the relevant levers are controlled by the state, quasi-independent authorities, labor contracts, or complex boards. Mamdani's supporters may call that a structural obstacle. Critics will call it overpromising. Both descriptions contain truth. The rent issue is another case where his politics are strong but the policy trade-offs are real. Mamdani's appointments gave him a majority of picks on the Rent Guidelines Board, making a rent freeze more plausible for roughly 1 million rent-stabilized apartments. For tenants, that is easy to understand and easy to support. Rents are crushing people and a freeze offers direct relief. But the downside is also obvious. Rent regulation that is too blunt can strain building finances, especially for smaller owners with rising costs. Even outlets not aligned with landlord interests have noted that the board's decisions now sit at the center of a fierce conflict over affordability versus building maintenance and investment incentives. That leads to the broader anti-Mamdani argument. His administration may be too comfortable with redistributive answers and not sufficiently attentive to second-order effects. Higher taxes on top earners may be popular, but cities with globally mobile capital and talent have to think about behavioral response, not just headline fairness. Business groups and critics argue that aggressive tax hikes could weaken New York's competitiveness, especially if paired with a rhetoric of hostility toward wealth. Those warnings are sometimes overstated, but they are not imaginary. A city dependent on high-income earners and finance sector strength cannot completely dismiss the risk of capital flight, slower investment, or declining confidence. There is also a management critique on public safety. Even though headline crime numbers are favorable so far, Mamdani's creation of the Office of Community Safety has triggered real concern among people who worry about administrative duplication, slower response chains, or ideological overcorrection. The strongest skeptical version is not crime is exploding, because the data do not show that. It is that New York may be layering a new bureaucracy onto an already complicated safety landscape without yet proving that the institutional redesign will outperform disciplined policing plus existing services. In city government, new offices can become either genuine innovation or expensive overlap. That question remains open. Another criticism is that Mamdani's style sometimes seems more movement-driven than implementation-driven. That style can be energizing, especially after years of technocratic cynicism, but it carries risk. Governing New York City is not the same as campaigning in it. The city's administrative machine is enormous, unionized, legally constrained, and fiscally exposed. A mayor who raises expectations quickly can pay a heavy price if residents feel the practical results lag behind the emotional promise. That tension is already visible in the gap between what Mamdani campaigned on and what has been delivered or delayed in only a few months. So how is he doing? The most accurate answer is, he is governing boldly but not yet proving durability. His early months show genuine policy ambition, especially on affordability. He has already moved from campaign language into concrete steps on childcare, housing delivery, ADUs, and budget restructuring. That distinguishes him from politicians who simply inherit a message and then coast. But the equally true answer is that the hard part has only begun. The childcare rollout is still partial. Fare-free buses are unresolved. Rent policy has not yet reached its decisive test. The budget remains the central arena in which his political identity will either mature or break. If he can show that he can protect affordability while maintaining investor confidence, service reliability, and credible savings, he will have done something quite significant in American urban politics. If he cannot, critics will say his administration proved that progressive municipal politics is better at naming injustice than managing systems. At this stage, I would call Mamdani's record promising in intention, partial in execution, and uncertain in sustainability. He has already changed the city's political conversation. Whether he can change the city's governing reality on the same scale is the unanswered question. That is the real measure of how he is doing.